Here we go. Aeon Trespass Odyssey from Into the Unknown. Holy bleeping bleep, Batman. This is a freaking amazing game. In case you weren't aware, in case you haven't heard anything about it, I've played through almost the whole thing of Cycle 1. Not going to give you any spoilers, but I'm going to tell you right now, what do you need to know about the mechanics? What do you need to know about the gameplay? What do you need to know as a whole that makes this game, in my opinion, for me personally speaking, easily one of the best games I've played in 2022. But I'm going to already make the argument that I prefer this over Kingdom Death Monster. Let's talk. So that box absolutely is a freaking amazingly big box, and that is 3 of the 5 cycles that are going to be in this game as a whole. And these cycles are basically narrative-based adventurers, if you're familiar with Kingdom Death Monster, where you're vacillating back and forth between boss battling with a map like this, and then going to an overworld adventure where you're exploring, navigating, trading, interacting, and unlocking. And that's where the similarities both are very heavy with Kingdom Death Monster, but also very divergent. The scope of this game is absolutely massive. I cannot understate that when it comes to the amount of content that is in just the main first cycle that I have played through. Just an absolute stick your mouth to a fire hydrant amount of content. And in some ways, you may think of that as a bad thing, but I'm going to argue that in this case, it works, and that's one of the reasons why it works so much better for me than Kingdom Death Monster, right? Let me break it down for you a little bit in terms of what you need to know to see if this game is right for you, because although I have not played through, obviously, all 3 cycles, each of the cycles is subsequently longer than the previous, so 2 longer than 1, 3 longer than 2. And so if I've already spent a couple dozen hours on one, that kind of tells you where you need to stand. And that's assuming, of course, that like Kingdom Death Monster, this game is brutally difficult and you will die, you will lose characters, and you will have them replaced, and you can even lose the game as a whole if you're not careful in how you're navigating the dynamic system of the whole picture rather than just, say, the picture on this battlefield or the picture on the little grid-based 7th continent-like map. You're probably saying at this point, okay, Chris, tell me why this is so good. Tell me what sets it apart from Kingdom Death Monster. Tell me why I should prefer this, or what else I should know about it to see whether or not it's for me. And you'll notice that it has very similar aesthetic, very similar vibe, very similar back and forth. I would argue, though, that the narrative portion of things is significantly heavier, significantly more malleable, and significantly more rewarding on the narrative side of things. I mean, KDM is a boss battler with extra stuff thrown in to me. This is a very, very, not equal split, but much, much, much more even. And the narrative is probably one of the, if not the most impressive narrative so far, just in Cycle 1, that I have played through in terms of meaningful interactions, dynamics, unpredictability on the narrative, as well as just feeling like you're progressing. Because that's one of the things I will say about Kingdom Death Monster is, at times, it seems to me, as one of my big faults for it, is you have to game the game. You only can win, or you can only get so far unless you significantly game the game from the get-go. Optimization, puzzle, rather than experience. With this, I don't feel like I have to have everything exactly 100% right, but it still doesn't lose the dynamic of living on the edge, literally and metaphorically speaking, in some of these battles. And so that's the thing that you need to know. It doesn't lose that hard-lined edge of, okay, well, if I screw this up, I'm really going to die. No, I mean, that is actively a portion of things in both the narrative as well as the battling. So how does that dynamic work? What else do you need to know? Well, the battling you're going to see here on the board that I've got set up here is very similar aesthetically, right? One main board. This board is going to change. It's going to be very dynamic. You'll notice I have terrain elements that are both destructible, anything without a red line, and then you'll notice that I also have indestructible elements as well. And as you're going to be fighting enemies, they are not only going to be, just like with Kingdom Death Monster, able to interact with the terrain, able to destroy the terrain, or move through the terrain depending on where it is or what it is. And you can even have bosses, no spoilers here, but This is a massive freaking miniature right here. This is the same symbol that you noticed if you were carefully paying attention to the white box as well. And he's just freaking huge. And he actually, for example, lays down tiles. And how do you deal with that? So the dynamics are there, but the dynamics are also different. This is not a KDM clone. They did not take KDM and go, okay, we're just going to make our little spin on it. No, this thing stands on its own. The main thing that I saw comparison-wise so far with KDM is that, okay, KDM is offering more modularity, right? I can sub this boss in, I can sub this boss out, and I can have some variability there. Well, you are getting that here. If I have this guy, well, this guy has not just 3 levels, he has like 10 levels. This guy, same thing. How much damage can you do? You're not supposed to necessarily be able to do a lot of damage to this guy. So it's do enough damage and run away. So the dynamics, the mechanics are there differently. But if you're familiar with KDM, for example, it has 2 main decks that you're going to be utilizing, right? You have one deck, which is your AI deck, which you're taking, and this is the card you flip over, and this dictates in order preference of what the bad guy does, their target, what they do, and then any after effects. And then with the KDM system-ish, it says, okay, if I go over here and I go to this guy, I roll my dice to see if I hit. Oh, I hit. Then I get to roll my other dice to know whether or not I actually wound. Roll enough symbols on that, you do a wound, then you grab one of the other cards, the body part cards here, the BP cards, flip that over, it tells you what the defense is, and that's what you're going up against to know whether or not you do a wound. Has a critical value as well, something different that happens if you crit it, and then also if it has any response based on passing, failing, or critical response. And so that's the dynamic. And as you do damage to these level 1 cards, they get subbed out. They get taken for wounds, which are going to be very useful because they give you resources at the end of the battle. Then you put in a level 2. Knock out a level 2, put in a level 3. But you're not only knocking out a body part of level 1 or level 2, you also at the same time substitute into this AI deck. So as you knock out the weaker parts of the body, its AI gets stronger, gets better, gets faster, gets smarter, if you will. Now, the other aspect of things is all of these enemies have cards as well. And you can see here, actually, this guy has 9 different levels, and the levels tell you the difference between, okay, what they hit, their abilities, the stacking of what you need to do, and then how it changes dynamically as you go along, and you get the higher levels, you get higher rewards, you get better stuff. And so that's the dynamic you're going across as you battle your way through this cycle through a certain number, we won't spoil things, a certain number of enemies that you'll be going up against, both known and unknown. Now, I will say the decks, the AI decks here, are probably not as gotcha as KDM. Now, again, like I said, though, it doesn't lack necessarily the punch, it just does it in a slightly different way. And it doesn't have anything to that extreme that's going to like wipe your party on the first attack, but especially at the higher levels, and especially at these higher levels, whoo boy. One of the more recent battles I had a little while ago with this guy was that when he leveled up from 1 to 2, for example, he does an attack, it knocked one of my characters back, it would have knocked him off the edge. Now, normally, it just gets pushed back, and it gets moved sideways and that sort of thing. It doesn't go all the way off the edge. But at this level, all of a sudden, the edges become cliffs, and if you fall off, you're dead. So it changes the dynamic of what you need, and so it gives you that option, that mitigation, not only through abilities that you're going to be earning through multiple different ways, but also a huge stack of gear. And this gear is probably the other thing, along with the technology, that I will say easily surpasses anything of KDM, because KDM, you have a very limited set in comparison. This has an absolutely massive stack of not only gear that you will be able to make, but technology that you will be able to unlock. And the nice thing about this is you have 2 different ways of doing these technologies. Is you have these big technology cards, and then you have the rest of these small technology cards, which are double-sided. And you can see here in this deck, without going over any spoilers, I have them on one side, and then I have a bunch on the other. Because as you're going along on your track, because you're keeping track, just like with Kingdom Death Monster, on these sheets. And that might be a little bit of a turnoff, but it actually works relatively well and very fluidly. You're going to see on this sheet, again, no spoilers, that you're going down and checking off the years here, for example. No spoilers here, because this is an old one. And you can see that some of these boxes are checked. If you look kind of closely, there's some symbols along the side that has some iconography, and those represent you earning technology just through the sheer use of time, not having to spend a bunch of resources or a bunch of very tightly held together things that you need otherwise. And you just basically get to flip one of these cards over when that happens, and you have two different kinds of cards depending on either your battling, essentially, or your diplomacy-esque, your non-battling skills. And so you're getting each of those that way, and they subsequently unlock sort of a tech tree. So for example, here I have one that says Force Kratos Reaction, no spoilers. It requires Siren Armor technology to be already unlocked. And then when you unlock this one, or when you get to this one, it allows you to have Hecaton's Sighting. And so it's going to, again, unlock one that goes to this area that you can then complete when you have all the requirements that you need to complete it. So some of these that I have right here are ones that I've just chosen not to do yet. And some of them are ones that I don't meet the requirements for yet. I mean, I have a stack probably here of about, 25 of them. Not even half of them. For cycle 1. Very similarly here, the gear. Offensive, defensive, and equipment. And then this is massive. This is probably much bigger than KDM, and there's more variety. Now there's much limited number, but the resources aren't as sparse because not only are you gathering resources from the boss battles that I mentioned, you're also gathering them from your explorations phase in the voyage aspect of things from the larger picture. The other thing that I like about this a lot better is that Kingdom Death Monster, when you get something unique, it's because you rolled super, super high and super, super rare, right? Most of the time. And this definitely has that element, but it also has plenty of secret things more accessibly hidden out in a broader expanse. So you may not have to roll a 99 on the table to get something. You might roll an 8 on a certain level of an adventure or make a certain path choice, and all of a sudden you have a secret unlock from one of the 15 secret decks in the cycle, and you get something cool that you weren't expecting. And that's where some of these come in. There's also something called a god form. Ooh, those are cool looking. All of a sudden I can transform into Zeus, right? Ooh, spoilers there a little bit, but it's kind of obvious if you've seen the page as well. And things like that are just feeling like you get more progression out of. More accessibility to the really exciting stuff, because there's nothing worse than a game like this where you never get to get the cool stuff, right? Where you never get that ultimate armor, where you never get that awesome weapon that makes you able to beat the next boss because it's too hard, it's too grindy, I have to roll this perfect thing at this perfect time. That's the issue. Now, the one thing I'll say about that is when you're doing these battles, when you're doing the roll to hit and then the roll to wound die combat so far, is that the critting right now is overall probably harder than it is with KDM, because KDM gives you a few more ways that I have seen to mitigate it than this does when you're rolling. And of course, I roll a crit right there on camera. So obviously it's that easy all the time. But the tricky part here is not that you roll a crit, but it's that you'll notice that my black and my white die are rolled. The white die is your crit die. I have to roll the crit on this die, not this die. So that's the issue with the crits there. That makes it a little bit harder, especially at some of the higher levels, to get the rewards that you may be only able to get from those aspects. Now, like I mentioned, you saw the bad guy elements, right? You've seen the bad guy cards. They have the levels. They tell you how many hits you have to do. You're subbing in and out their AI and their BP cards. And then you have your Titan here. This is not your Argonaut. I confused that previously, mixing and matching terms. Your Argonaut is the pilot, essentially, for your Titan. And so what you have here is your typical example card. And so what you've got at the bottom down here are the two big things for your Titan. One, you have the damage tracker. Two, you have the absolute innovative catch-up mechanic, or how you get stronger and go Super Saiyan as the battle goes longer and you get more damaged. This system is also used in Kingdoms Forlorn in terms of as you go throughout the battle, you potentially not only can take more damage, but you also go stronger. And I was a little bit apprehensive about this. I like it much better here so far than my prototype copy of what I played with Kingdoms Forlorn. And again, I don't know what the final product obviously is going to look like for that, but boy howdy, do I like the strongerness. Boy howdy, do I like how much stronger it makes you and how much it can swing a battle potentially. It's a really underutilized and really cool mechanic, to be very frank with you. It's probably one of the most innovative mechanics I've seen, because what you're doing is you're tracking along this little thing they call a Triskelion, which is basically a little stat marker for 3 different stats you're collecting at one time. The bottom being your damage, essentially. We'll talk about that in a second. The side one over here being your fate. Fate being, you know, how much are you trying to influence your fate within the threads of fate, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, because the gods don't usually like that. And then this one up here being the rage, and that's the big one. As your rage goes up, you get more access to the bottom of this red area, and as you go up on this area right here, you get more abilities, more rerolls, more tokens to affect your attack rolls, and then more dice potentially on this wounding side of things. And so you get the ability not only to put them in areas that can help you, but areas that are in the combat phase that can help the next person hit better, hit stronger. That's cool. Now, the other different mechanic I didn't talk about here is the red one. The red one here is the damage mechanic, because as I mentioned, it's not like you just injure a body part with KDM and you get crippled or, you know, you have something bad happen. That is what's represented by the bottom danger component here on the bottom of this little dial. And so what happens is as you take damage, you draw from then one of 3 different decks that are going to be available to you. You have a minor deck, a major deck, and a grave deck. And so as you take damage, depending on how much damage you have, you draw from 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9. Hit over 9 and you potentially die. That's a whole nother issue. I'm not going to go into that. But the tricky part is sometimes you take damage. Sometimes it actually boosts you, because you're getting the adrenaline surge, thematically speaking, and it actually surges you. Now, the problem is, if you're going to throw positive things in there, they've also done things to throw in significant negatives that will counteract that or even be potentially worse, especially at a minor level. I mean, the other night I was just playing and one of my Titans got hit by, I think it was actually this guy. I had to draw a card, condition card, based on what he was hitting me with as an after effect. I had to draw a dread card, and then I got a fear card based on the minor damage that I got, and it killed my Titan, because if you have both of them, Titan dies, right? So that sucked, because it was just like the first hit of the combat. So if you're one of those hardcore people that's looking at it as KDM, like, oh, I'm not hard enough, believe me, this game is hard enough between the die rolling and the stuff like that that's going to happen, and the stuff like I mentioned before about getting hit in combat and all of a sudden, whoosh, being thrown off at the beginning if you don't have the right positioning and the right setting, that it's going to leave you not disappointed from that way either. Now, I mentioned these cards. You also have individual character sheets which you're tracking stats with as well, because as you're going along, you have these conditions that the characters are going to be getting, and these are called Nemos. And they're going to be gathering these from a variety of sources. And what happens essentially is they're conditions, but they're conditions that sort of evolve. And as you collect nodes for them, points on them, essentially, you unlock abilities. And the tricky part is, I mean, you can see right here that I've got 8 of them, because each character can only have 2, and they all have 3 different levels. And as you unlock them, they're actually quite useful, but those are the things that are also going to be variable depending on who they get assigned to randomly as you're going along, which gives you another dynamic aspect of things. Because most of the time, it's not you as the pilot, the Argonaut, who's dying, it's your Titan that you're controlling that I just mentioned in these large sheets, because these large sheets are different from your Argonaut, which is controlling it as well. So just a different dynamic you're dealing with there. And there's lots of other hidden surprises along the way in terms of the gear, in terms of the limitations, in terms of the effects, in terms of the long-standing effects, as well as the short-standing effects. You're dealing with the boat, the crew, the morale. There's loyalty to the 3 factions on the map that you're trying to deal with and mitigate all at the same time. Oh, did I mention the fact that you also have a mission that you're going to be trying to complete while getting certain icons on the table tableau set up like a 7th continent a la style, but you're also going to be trying to avoid the doom style tokens or symbols that are going to be spread throughout the way as you slowly uncover and unlock these as you lay them down and traverse in your boat. Oh, is there going to be something following you a long way? Is there something chasing you in the distance that's going to trying to kill you all the time too as well? There is, but I'm not going to talk about that because that'd be too much spoilers. But there's a lot going on, and the very surprising thing is it freaking works and sings like a symphony. I didn't expect it to, but it does. And I won't say that it's perfect. I can't say that I've even been playing it without missing rules from literally almost every time I've played it, and having to look up stuff and having to find stuff, and it's not all organized well, and the cards are all over the place. But I'll tell you this, I'm enjoying the hell out of it while I'm doing it. Right? And it doesn't leave me head scratching. It doesn't leave me in frustration. It brings just, wow, this is really cool. Wow, I just unlocked this. I just spent my story points instead on progressing the main story to unlock the inner journey of the ship, because the ship is a massive ship that you've never explored, and it's too big to explore because you're only one little Argonaut, and all of a sudden I've unlocked something super awesome, super secret, hidden in the depths of the bowels that no one has ever seen before, and I get to utilize that? That level of excitement. Because like I said, again, compared to KDM, I never got that in KDM, right? It's few and far between. The unlocks, the excitement, the secret stuff, the really feeling like there's significant progression without having to game the game, I just never got. And maybe I'm one of the only ones. Again, I have a copy sitting right down there. So hands-on copy. I'm very, very well versed in KDM. But this just strikes all those chords that KDM didn't for me. Now, I briefly talked about the monsters you're going to be going up against and the quests you're going to be doing, right? So you also can unlock special kinds of titans. You also have all of these other things that are going to be available. This is all of the cards right now for cycles 1 through 3. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. A ton of stuff. I cannot tell you, again, how much content there is and how excited I am to see that just the technology, just the items from this and the progression here that I've seen in cycle 1, it is pale in comparison to just skimming through and glancing without a clue and without spoiling too much for cycles 2 and 3. It makes me giddy in that sense because, again, it's not hidden behind a paywall. It's not hidden behind a $150 expansion. It's not hidden behind a super secret 99 crit roll on a random table. It's hidden behind progression. Did I also mention that there's a one-off theater that you can play separately to unlock even super special gear at super high levels? If you're one of those people that really wants to fight some of these bad guys at the super high levels as well, you can do that as well in addition. Yeah, you can. And guess what? It works. It freaking works. So I'm going to switch gears here for a second. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Voyage Phase, right? These are your 7th Continent-esque style Voyage cards, because this is the main other element that you're actually going to be spending a fair amount of time in. It's probably almost a 50-50 split, because the battle length, and then you spend a good amount of, potentially anywhere between a couple to, 6 turns or so in the Voyage Phase of going back and forth. And so what you're doing is you have one card down here, and this card has a bunch of symbology on it. And the other nice thing is they don't say, okay, we're going to explain to you every single symbol. The game progresses and you're going to be unlocking symbols. You're going to be unlocking glyphs. You're going to be unlocking secret coded messages that you have to learn the pieces of and decipher along the way, because you don't know what any of them mean. And if you do decipher them, then you can find even secret objectives and secret items that way as well. Again, layer on layer on layer. But also what you're going to see here is that there are numbers on most of the sides, not all the sides. And so what you do on your turn is you take your little miniature, for the lack of better miniature here, and you say, okay, I'm going to go this way. And so you flip it over. It says 17 over here. I take card 17. I place it right there. I progress here. There's a bunch of symbols. If there's a certain symbol, I go on an adventure phase. I open up my storybook. I go to that story, and then I do whatever it says otherwise. Again, not going into too much spoilers, because sometimes you'll stay in story, sometimes you won't. a little bit of twist and a little bit of unpredictability here. And so you're rinsing and repeating, right? So next I have card 18 here, so that's going to go over here, and you don't have to go in order, but you'll notice that in the lower right hand corner there's a symbol to represent the faction that controls this area, one of the 3 factions that you're going to be winning or losing influence with, depending on how you interact on this narrative side of things, because it also matters, because at the beginning of every one of these turns, you're also going to be drawing resource cards, potential resource cards, or more Dead of Winter-esque cards that could give you resources, could have other events happen that are going to influence things as well. And so then you're also going to have other symbols down the lower left here. This little bell icon. This is the Doom icon. That's the bad one. That progresses the Doom track. The Doom track actually has, again, its own cards like this that are 2-sided. And if you fill it up, okay, flip it over, bad stuff happens. And Believe me, you'll get those. No matter how much you try to not get them, you'll automatically have them, and they're going to do bad stuff. And so it's about how much can you mitigate it. And then obviously on the opposite end of things, on the lower left-hand corner, you also have the little upside down tokens that are little doom tokens in reverse, that are sort of, a little bit of upside down triangle. And that's the positive interaction on the quest or map side of things that allows you that progression to get more advancement either on the story or the inward unlocking of the Argo, which it's a really cool concept. Anyway, again, without spoilers, but there's a lot of other icons that go into these maps as you're laying them out, a la this style, because you're going to end up traversing and going through these ways and having various paths, but you're going to be unlocking them as you go, because there's definitely icons that you're going to be going across that it says, don't worry about those icons until we tell you what they are. And when we tell you what they are, then you'll be able to interact with them and understand what they are, because before then it doesn't really matter. And it gives you a very nice progression in that sense that's meaningful, but also rewards you for guessing right on the path, but also allows you to go back if you mess up. But if you end up on another space that even if you went to previously that has that Doom icon, you can still get the Doom icon again. So you have to be very thoughtful about, is it worth me going back through this area if I need to get back over here now that I've found out I need to go back over there? So it's just an interesting dynamic of, okay, which way am I going to go and how is it going to proceed and what's the risk benefit there? Because one move, one turn. Only so many of those. How are you going to manage it? And again, there is a huge freaking stack of these. Huge. And they're all different for cycle 1, for cycle 2, for cycle 3, of everything. There is very little overlap in terms of they don't use a whole bunch of stuff from cycle 1 into cycle 2. The content, again, is overwhelmingly magnificent. The miniatures, as you have seen, are wonderful. They're massive. They're well-sized. I mean, the monsters are spectacular. The Titans, they're okay. Nothing to write home about, but nothing to scoff at either. So no complaints there. Really, the dynamics, especially with some of these bosses, they're difficult. Again, there's going to be variety just within the bosses themselves, more so than Kingdom Death Monster, because of the variable levels that I showed you on these cards. And because you can't always predict when they're going to come, or how they're going to come, or what form you're going to face them in, it definitely gives a different vibe without needing necessarily to fight a different one or to be able to plug and play like KDM. Because I'll be honest, that's probably one of the few advantages I would prefer with KDM. Like, you can plug and play some of those monsters at certain times. So that is very nice. The other nice thing about this is that they did an absolutely fantastic job of doing a learn to play booklet completely separately, where they run you through step by step. Do this, do this. Here's a couple example rounds of battling. Here's a couple example rounds of the voyage phase. Back and forth very, very intuitively. So that really works as well. I was very pleased in learning how to play and the ease in which I picked it up without having read through the whole rulebook, because the rulebook is probably about 85 pages. And that's probably the big downside, is it's so dense and they have so much going on, like I mentioned earlier, that inevitably you're going to mess up stuff. And I'm still probably messing up a few things here along the way, back and forth. And to be very frank with you, even at the end of cycle 1, I am still looking up stuff to make sure I'm clarifying it and doing it right, because I either don't remember because it's been a while since I've done it, or it's a minutia thing that I'm making sure I'm getting right, because inevitably when I have to try and remember, I'm getting it wrong as well. And I hate doing that. But it doesn't stop, again, my fun from learning this game. The big downside is, again, it's a lot of dice rolling. And so if you don't like that style of combat, where if you just roll the dice bad and you don't get what you need, 2 7s on that roll isn't going to be good enough. Because with some of these monsters, especially at the higher levels, you're talking a D10 there that only goes up obviously to 10, where you're going to have to hit 10 or even 11 on some of these monsters. So that has to be a factor in how you do manage it, because although it's not a pure optimization puzzle like I feel KDM can be sometimes when you're trying to get to those higher levels, there definitely is that element. I like the one thing I'm missing as well from the KDM gear. There is no pattern matching on the KDM grid, if you know what I'm talking about, where you just get to collect this stuff and mix and match along the way, which is kind of nice because I don't have to think about it, but I kind of like that puzzle of getting those combos, because the combo effect that you were able to get sometimes really gave you a significant benefit of the sum being greater than the parts of these equipments. And so far in, cycle 1, there isn't that effect. There isn't that element of, if I have this gear, and this gear, wow, is this really better now? But I like the damage system a lot better too. It's not just like, oh, well, you just happen to have that body part unprotected, so whoops, there goes that, right? Like, there's a risk reward with this, but it's still not losing the element of feeling like at any point you could have some serious consequences as well. So, what can I say? It's just a freakingly fantastic game. What I can say is that I did not have the highest expectations for this. I said, you know what? I hope I like this. Because I've also sort of fallen out of love with KDM. I just have. It's too long and too brittle for, you know, my game group in that sense of with some of those dynamics. And the player count for both of these games is an equal criticism that you need to play with 4 characters at all times. I've had a much easier time managing it with this game. But that was my other fear with this, was how easy was it going to be to do? And it actually works very, very smoothly. I was not overwhelmed with the choices. I was not overwhelmed with the managing of, the dials. It just is easily to keep track of. There's not too much on the sheets that you're writing down for either the Argonauts or the Argonaut as a whole, the ship. The dynamic of the elements just works. But if you weren't a fan of this style of game in the first place, this probably isn't going to convert you. But there are more things that are more accessible that I think it's going to be more open to everyone in that sense. Also, you know, we can't not talk about the price point. The price point for this was not insignificant, but again, compared to Kingdom Death Monster and the amount of content you're getting for all 5 cycles versus the same price for just the KDM core, it's not even a comparison. You know, yeah, if you throw in all the other KDM expansions and stuff, but you're talking easily a couple grand then. You could buy this game, you know, 8 to 10 times over for that price. And so from that aspect, it's also a no-brainer. How available is it going to be? What does the exact retail scheme of things look like? I have no idea. But if you had just the 3 cycles, that's easily just as much content as the KDM core. No questions asked. Probably, maybe even more as well, significantly, just by the sheer fact that you can get through it a lot easier, but that doesn't make it any less expansive. I would argue that, especially with a narrative, and especially with all the hidden secret stuff, that the playthroughs that I've had so far would be significantly different if I made different choices, or if I'm exploring the little 7th continent style map differently as well. So you're not going to have the same dynamic, because that's the other criticism that I would fear in this game, is that, you know, with the KDM, right, and the reason people plug and play those bosses is that they do the same, you know, 3 white lion battles and 3 antelope battles back and forth, right? And they have that all planned out. They have that all mapped out. I need to do this then, and this then, and this then to be able to have this by then, right? Like, I don't get that feeling here. It gives you the option if you want to fight this guy or the other guy a couple times back and forth, and then eventually some other guys are going to come along the way, maybe to when you choose, maybe not to when you choose, but it doesn't feel so constrained necessarily or puzzly in a, you need to do this aspect, like I was talking about at the beginning. And some people are going to argue, I'm sure, that, you know, you don't have to do it like that, or KDM isn't, you know, that's okay. That's just what it leaves me with the feeling with, which is why I prefer this now easily over Kingdom Death Monster. And I would be very happy if I only had this in my collection as a whole. How does it compare to other games out there like Oathsworn and things like even Frosthaven? Well, to be determined. I haven't played through much of Oathsworn yet, but I'll tell you right now, I started both this and Frosthaven in the same week. I got through 2 scenarios of Frosthaven. I've been playing this since. So this has definitely kept me more hooked so far. I will obviously be going back to Frosthaven, but I'm just captivated by this right now. And that's the biggest compliment I can probably give a board game as a whole. And this is going to be on a lot of people's top 10 lists once they play it of the year, easily. Maybe even higher than that, potentially as well. So there you go. My early thoughts and impressions on where Aeon Trespass Odyssey is currently and where it's going to be going. That direction, folks. So Into the Unknown, you know, if you hadn't given this a shot the first time around, you should be seriously thinking about it. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know in the comment section down below. And no, just as a disclaimer here at the end, they didn't send me this. This is my own backer copy that I got and have just been massively, massively playing through. So enjoy it that much. There you go. See you around.